My name is Rachel Meyer, and before I tell you what happened, let me give you one image to hold in your mind the calm before a storm you don't even know is coming. It was a Thursday morning, the kind of spring morning where the sunlight spills across the kitchen table like a promise. My mom had made breakfast scrambled eggs, sourdough toast, even a dash of hot sauce on the side, just the way she used to when I was in high school before early swim practice. For a moment, I let myself believe it meant something like maybe we were finding our way back to each other. I told her I'd only be gone 2 days, just a maintenance job at the shipyard over in Charleston. But then I added almost shyly, the new job starts Monday. It wasn't a glamorous role, but it was solid pay, full-time benefits, and finally enough to clear the last of what I owed her. She nodded without looking up from her phone, fingers tapping a reply to someone else. "That's great, honey," she murmured, and I could tell it was just reflex, not a response. Her eyes stayed glued to the screen, the glow reflecting off her glasses. I smiled anyway, forcing lightness into my voice. "I know it's not some big corporate gig, but it's steady. I'll be able to—" She tilted the phone away from me and hummed a distracted sound. The silence between us stretched thin. When I stood to rinse my plate, she finally looked up. "Drive safe," she said, her voice suddenly warm but brief, like a performance for an invisible audience. She kissed my cheek, pulled me into a side hug, then returned to scrolling. I walked to my car with my duffel bag clanking from the welding tools inside. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced back once. Just enough to see the curtain shift in the front window, a sliver of movement. Watching, hiding, I couldn't tell. Back then, I thought it was just another awkward goodbye. I had no idea that the next time I pulled into that driveway, I wouldn't be coming home. And before I go on, if you've ever felt like someone in your own family was smiling at you while quietly pushing you out, tell me where you're watching from. It's strange how many of us carry these quiet betrayals, and I want to know if I'm not the only one. That morning, I drove away thinking about the new chapter ahead. What I didn't realize was that my life wasn't turning a page. It was about to be ripped out, balled up, and thrown straight into the trash. Literally. The contract in Charleston wrapped earlier than anyone expected. By mid-afternoon, the second day, I was already loading my gear back into the truck, eager for a hot shower and my own bed. My hands still smelled faintly of steel and burnt rubber, a scent that had become almost comforting after years of welding. The drive back was quiet. Windows cracked, wind cutting through the hum of the engine. I thought about Monday, new job, new start, maybe even a chance to finally feel like I wasn't living on borrowed time in my mother's basement. It was just after 6:30 p.m. when I turned onto our street. I slowed as I approached the driveway, and at first I didn't process what I was seeing. Black garbage bags. Dozens of them lined in an uneven row along the edge of the lawn. Some were ripped open, spilling socks, sweaters, and spiral notebooks into the damp grass. My duffel bag, my welding gear, was sitting upright as if someone had thrown it and it landed wrong. My gaming monitor leaned against the mailbox unwrapped and dangerously close to tipping over. And there they were. My mother, phone in hand, holding it out like she was demonstrating a recipe for an audience. Beside her, my younger sister Hannah had her arm outstretched, selfie-style panning across the scene. I could hear her voice before I even shut the truck door. And here she is, folks, back from another so-called business trip, still owing $8,000 in rent. Watch closely. This is what entitlement looks like. I froze. The humiliation hit like a punch in the ribs, but my body stayed still. The porch light was on, even though the sun hadn't fully set, casting a stage-like glow over my things strewn across the yard. From the side of the house, my older brother Mark appeared. He paced like a security guard with nothing to do, then smirked when he saw me. He walked up to one of the garbage bags and kicked it hard enough that a stack of my books skidded into the dirt. Finally, he said, "The family freeloader is out for good." The words stuck in my throat. My chest tightened as if all the oxygen had been sucked out. My mom raised her voice, polished and performative. Rachel Meyer, 32 years old, living in my basement for months like a parasite. No more. This is your eviction notice, public and permanent. From across the street, I caught glimpses of neighbors. Mrs. Kent stood on her porch with her dog's leash wound tightly in her hands. Mr. Linton was half hidden behind a hedge phone, angled like he was filming too. Not one person stepped forward. I bent down, slowly picking up a hardcover book, whose jacket had been bent nearly in half. I smoothed it out with my palm, set it gently on the passenger seat of my truck, and reached for the next item. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just kept loading my things piece by piece while Hannah narrated every move like a sports commentator desperate for drama. When the last bag was in the truck bed, I shut the tailgate, quietly turned to face them, and said in a low voice, "Enjoy the show. You'll be hearing from me soon." Even now, thinking about that moment, I can still feel the heat rising in my face, but it wasn't shame. It was something sharper. And listen, if you've ever had a moment when you realized that someone you thought was on your side was actually rooting for your downfall, drop it in the comments. I know I'm not the only one, and hearing your stories might just help someone else who's in the thick of it right now. Because in that instant, surrounded by the people I shared blood with and the neighbors who pretended not to see, I learned something I'll never forget. Sometimes the cleanest break is the one you don't announce. You just take your things, you get in your truck, and you drive away without looking back. I wish I could tell you I drove off without incident, that I slipped away unnoticed into whatever came next. But that's not how it went. As I reached for the driver's side door, I heard the porch door slam open. Heavy footsteps pounded down the wooden stairs. My father emerged, face red, jaw tight, shoulders squared, like he was marching into battle. In his right hand, something glinted in the porch light. He didn't slow down. At the bottom step, he flung a set of keys toward me. They struck the side of my face with a dull metallic thud before clattering onto the gravel. "Take your junk and get out," he barked, voice sharp enough to slice through the humid evening air. "You're not our daughter anymore. Real adults don't mooch off their parents at your age." I rubbed the spot where the metal had struck the skin, already warm and tender. But I didn't flinch. Not in front of him. That would have been the victory they were waiting for, the meltdown to complete their little public spectacle. Behind him, Hannah adjusted her phone, angling for a better shot. Mark resumed pacing, grinning like a man who'd just won a bet. My mom stood in the center of it all, her expression carefully neutral, as if she were merely an observer to this theater. I bent down, picked up the keys, and straightened slowly. My dad held my gaze, waiting for me to break, but I didn't. I opened the driver's side door, climbed in, and shut it with deliberate quiet. The kind of quiet that says I choose not to play your game. Before starting the engine, I looked out through the window at my mom, with her rehearsed indifference, Hannah with her manufactured outrage, Mark with his bored cruelty, and finally my dad. His eyes didn't waver, but for just a second something flickered there. Confusion, maybe. I turned the key. The engine roared softly to life. I pulled away at a crawl, my headlights washing over the warped shadows of my childhood street. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just drove. Past the familiar houses with their trimmed hedges and cracked sidewalks. Past the corner store where I used to buy grape soda with pocket change. Past every landmark that used to mean home. At some point, I pulled into the grocery store parking lot, killed the headlights, and just sat there with the engine idling. My hands stayed on the wheel, like if I let go, I'd come apart. It wasn't fear. It was something else, like my body was holding on until my mind could catch up. Eventually, I made my way to Lena's apartment. She was my closest friend, the kind of person who never asked for explanations you weren't ready to give. Her porch light was still on. Inside, I set my overnight bag on the floor, kicked off my boots, and sank into her couch. That's when I remembered the envelope. It had been buried at the bottom of my filing bin for over a year. Thick, cream-colored paper, no return address, my name written in my grandfather's steady, old-fashioned cursive. He'd given it to me in the hospital a few weeks before he passed. "Don't open it unless things get bad," he'd said. I stared at it now, the weight of the day pressing down from all sides. If this wasn't bad, I didn't know what was. Lena appeared with 2 mugs of tea, set one beside me, and disappeared into her room. She knew I'd talk when I was ready. I slid a finger under the flap. The paper opened cleanly, like it had been waiting patiently for this exact moment. Inside was a folded letter, several notarized documents, and a business card from a law firm downtown. The letter began in my grandfather's familiar shorthand. "Rachel, if you're reading this, it means they've done what I feared. I couldn't protect you from them while I was alive, so I'm doing it now." My eyes scanned faster. "I've placed part of the house, the lake cabin, and the workshop building in your name. It's all legal. You don't owe them anything, not apologies, not silence, not guilt. This is for when they forget what you're worth." The room blurred at the edges. My fingers shook, but not from sadness. From something sharper, something like clarity. I sat there with the letter spread across my lap, my knees pulling tight together like I was trying to keep the weight of it all from spilling onto the floor. The papers were thick official trust agreements, property deeds all stamped and signed months before my grandfather passed. My name appeared in bold print, next to percentages 40% of the family home, half of the lake cabin, 35% of the commercial workshop my father's business ran out of. The business card at the bottom read Arthur Lang and Associates Estate and Property Law. I read the letter again slower this time. Each line landed heavier than the last. My grandfather had known. Not the specifics, he couldn't have predicted the exact day they'd dump my life into garbage bags, but he'd seen the trajectory. He'd lived long enough to watch the cracks in our family widen to see who was willing to push and who was willing to let someone fall. The tea beside me had gone cold. Lena peeked out from her room, her eyes scanning my face for some clue. "You okay?" she asked softly. I nodded, though my voice betrayed me. I think my life just changed. The next morning I dialed the number on the business card. A receptionist answered, her tone brisk, until I mentioned my grandfather's name. There was a pause, then a shift. "Can you come in this afternoon? Mr. Lang can make time for you." His office was tucked inside a weathered stone building near the river. Inside it smelled faintly of leather and old books. Mahogany shelves lined the walls, each filled with volumes whose spines had been worn by decades of hands. When Mr. Lang stepped into the room, I recognized him instantly, tall, silver-haired, with the same deliberate calm he'd had years ago when I used to sit in the corner of his office drawing in a red sketchbook while Grandpa talked business. "You've grown," he said with a small smile. Then his expression turned serious as he motioned for me to sit. I handed him the envelope and watched as he examined each page with the kind of precision that comes from knowing exactly what you're looking for. He read the trust agreement twice, flipping it back and forth, checking seals and signatures. Finally, he set the stack down and met my eyes. "It's all valid. The trust was finalized before your grandfather passed. They can't legally remove you sell without your consent or claim ignorance. And if they've been collecting rent or taking loans against any of these properties without your signature, they've created a serious legal problem for themselves." A pulse of heat moved through me, not quite anger, not quite relief, but something in between. "What do I do now?" I asked. "That depends on how you want to handle it," he said. "You can try for quiet negotiations, or you can prepare for a fight." I didn't hesitate. "I'm ready to proceed." He nodded once, as if he'd been expecting that answer. "Then let's begin." That night, Hannah texted me for the first time since the eviction circus. "Hope you're not mad. The video wasn't meant to embarrass you. It's just content, you know how the algorithm is." I didn't respond. By morning, there were a dozen more messages, 2 missed calls from Mom, and a voicemail from Mark that began with, "You're overreacting," and ended with, "Just come back and talk like an adult." I forwarded everything to Mr. Lang. By midday, Dad's number lit up my screen. "We need you to sign a few things. No drama, just paperwork. No explanation, no apology." Mr. Lang replied on my behalf with a formal notice that all future communication should go through his office. He CC'd their family attorney. I turned off read receipts on my phone and let the silence do the work. That evening, as I stacked the few books I'd salvaged onto a shelf Lena had cleared for me, I realized something. I wasn't in hiding. I wasn't in retreat. This was positioning. The kind you only get once you know the ground you're standing on belongs to you. 2 days later, Mr. Lang called me back into his office. There was a different edge to his voice this time. Less patient, more clipped, like he'd found exactly what he was looking for. "I've reviewed the income history on the properties," he began. "Your parents and siblings have been collecting rent from the lake cabin and the commercial workshop for the past 3 years. None of it disclosed to you. Total just over $50,000. I leaned back in the chair, the air in the room suddenly heavier. 50,000. Not a windfall, but enough to feel like a deliberate, sustained theft. "They'll try to spin this," Mr. Lang continued. "Call it a misunderstanding, a clerical oversight. But we both know better." I nodded slowly. "What's our move?" He slid a draft letter across the desk. "We send this certified to their attorney. It outlines the exact amount owed, your ownership percentages, and a demand for repayment. We also notify the banks that any loans secured against the commercial property without your signature are potentially fraudulent." I signed without hesitation. That night, as Lena and I sat on her couch eating leftover Chinese takeout, I told her the whole thing, every detail from the garbage bags on the lawn to my grandfather's letter. She didn't interrupt once, just listened, her chopsticks frozen halfway to her mouth, when I got to the 50,000. "Rachel," she said finally, "do you think they even see this as wrong? Or do they think you're the one betraying them by calling it out?" The question lingered long after the food was gone. "And it's something I want to ask you too. If someone you love took from you, but told themselves it was justified. Would you confront them or let it go? I'm curious how you'd handle it, because I know this isn't just my story. The certified letters went out the next morning. That's when the real quiet started. Not the shocked, awkward silence from before, but something colder, strategic. 3 days later, Mark showed up at my job. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon. I'd just clocked out for lunch and was heading toward the back parking lot when I saw him leaning against the hood of my truck, arms folded, phone in hand. I considered turning around and waiting him out, but that felt like giving ground I'd just claimed, so I kept walking. "Rachel," he said, his tone too casual. "Got a minute?" I gripped my keys, keeping them ready between my fingers. "Make it quick." He stepped into my path. "We need to talk. You're tearing the family apart over some technicality." "That technicality is my legal right," I said evenly. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "That money wasn't yours, and if you want to play this lawyer game, fine, but it's not going to end the way you think." 2 of my coworkers walked out the back door just then, calling my name. Mark glanced over his shoulder, then stepped back, muttering something under his breath. "I won't say it again," I told him, pulling out my phone. "This is harassment. You need to leave." By the time security arrived, he was gone. I filed an incident report and forwarded the parking lot footage to Mr. Lang, who replied within the hour, noted and logged. Proceeding as discussed. The thing about growing up in a family like mine is you get used to being on defense, always explaining, always proving. But now they were the ones reacting to me. And I'll tell you this much, it was only the beginning. The visit from Mark was just a preview of what was coming. 2 nights later, the knock came sharp, insistent, too loud for the quiet hallway outside Lena's apartment. I froze halfway between the couch and the door, my phone already in my hand. When I pulled up the building's security camera feed, my stomach tightened. All 4 of them. My mother stood front and center, a tissue clutched in her hand, like she was rehearsing for a role. My father was beside her, arms crossed, jaw-locked, eyes fixed on the door as if sheer will could make it open. Mark leaned against the wall, bored, but still scanning the hallway, while Hannah scrolled through her phone, occasionally glancing toward the camera, like she knew I'd be watching. "Rachel," my mother called, her voice breaking just enough to sound believable. "Please, honey, we just want to talk. This has all gotten out of hand." My father stepped forward, his voice booming against the door. "Open the door. You're acting like a child." From somewhere behind him, Mark muttered something I couldn't catch. Hannah didn't look up from her screen. I didn't answer right away. I wanted them to sit in the discomfort, to feel how heavy silence could be when it wasn't theirs to control. Dad knocked again, harder this time. "We are your family. You can't just shut us out over paperwork." I took a slow breath, then spoke clearly, loud enough for the mic to catch every word. "All future communication goes through Mr. Lang. You've already been informed of this." There was a pause, a flicker of surprise in the way their bodies shifted, like they hadn't expected me to respond at all. Then my mother's voice again, thinner this time. "Now you don't have to do this. We can work it out, just the 5 of us. We'll delete the videos. We'll fix it." From the feed, I watched Hannah glance at her phone, then tuck it behind her back. She wasn't here for peace. She was here for content. "I'm not discussing anything without legal representation," I said. "If you remain here, I will contact building security." My father's face darkened. "So you're hiding behind lawyers now?" His words were meant to sting, but all I heard was desperation. "You told me I wasn't your daughter," I reminded him. "Remember?" Mark shifted his weight, suddenly interested in the floor tiles. Hannah started typing something on her phone. My mother wiped at her eyes, out of lines to deliver. They stood there for another minute, the hallway growing quieter, except for the faint hum of the security camera. Then they turned and walked away. No parting words, no threats. Just retreat. The moment the hallway was empty, I locked the deadbolt and opened my laptop. Mr. Lang had just emailed me a new file, settlement negotiation, initial draft. Inside was a summary of our demands, the financial breakdown, and a note in his terse handwriting, "We hold our line." And I'll say this, if you've ever had to stand your ground with people who thought they could talk you out of your own truth, I want to hear about it. Not because misery loves company, but because every story like this teaches someone else that boundaries aren't betrayal. That night, I slept with the deadbolt locked and the letter from my grandfather on the nightstand. Not as a reminder of what they'd done, but of what he'd given me, the one thing they couldn't take back, proof of worth. 2 days after the hallway confrontation, Mr. Lang called with an update. "They've made an offer," he said, his voice flat, giving away nothing. The email from their attorney had arrived that morning. My parents were willing to transfer full ownership of the lake cabin to me if I agreed to drop any claim on the back rent or future income from the commercial workshop. It was almost laughable. The cabin was worth maybe a third of what they owed me, and yet they framed it like a generous peace offering. "They think you'll bite," Mr. Lang said. "They assume you want closure more than you want fairness." I pictured the cabin, the peeling blue paint, the dock where I used to fish with Grandpa, the quiet mornings with mist curling off the lake. My heart ached for it. But then I thought of $50,000 quietly siphoned away of garbage bags on the lawn of a key ring thrown at my face. "No," I said firmly. "We reject, and we restate our terms." That night I wrote out exactly what mattered to me: a formal payment plan for the unpaid rent, a third-party property management company to handle all future income from both properties, and most important, a written admission of financial misrepresentation signed by every one of them. I handed the list to Mr. Lang the next morning. "I want it in writing," I told him. "Not just the money. I want the truth acknowledged." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Then that's what we'll demand." Weeks passed, the negotiations crawling forward like a slow game of chess. But while the legal gears turned, something else was happening. The cracks in their armor began to show. Hannah's social media accounts took a hit. The eviction livestream had been clipped and passed around online. Someone from my old high school recognized me and started posting receipts. Sponsors dropped her. Followers vanished by the thousands. She deleted the video, but the internet doesn't forget. Dad's business took damage, too. A client backed out of a major project after stumbling across a clip of the eviction. Then, one of his loan applications got flagged. Banks started asking questions, pulling up the trust documents that showed my ownership stake. Mom stopped texting altogether. Mark sent one angry email, short and vicious, that Mr. Lang forwarded to me without comment. Hannah tried calling twice. I let both go to voicemail. By the time their attorney responded again, the tone had shifted, less aggressive, more careful. They were no longer dictating terms. They were asking questions, testing the waters. And here's something I've learned: when people who've always held power over you suddenly start negotiating, it's not because they've grown more generous. It's because they've realized they can't win outright. Mr. Lang called again late on a Thursday. "They've agreed," he said simply. "Monthly payments, third-party oversight, and assigned admission, all 4 signatures." I read the draft twice before signing my part. At the bottom, just above my name, I added one sentence of my own. "Truth isn't betrayal. It's what happens when the performance ends." When the final agreement came through, I didn't sign it immediately. I let it sit on my desk for a full day, the pages neatly clipped together, the ink from their signatures still looking fresh in the scan. I read it line by line more than once, not because I didn't trust Mr. Lang, but because I wanted to feel the weight of what it meant. Every clause was there: the payment plan for the $50,000 in back rent, the third-party property manager, who would now oversee every lease and deposit, the formal admission of failure to disclose and accurately distribute property income, signed by my parents, my brother and my sister. It wasn't an apology, but it was something they could never take back. When I finally picked up the pen, I didn't rush. My name felt heavier than usual as it rolled off the tip, my hand pressing into the paper like I was anchoring myself to this moment. And then under my signature, that final sentence: "Truth isn't betrayal. It's what happens when the performance ends." I sent the signed copy back to Mr. Lang, and then I did something I hadn't done in months. I exhaled without feeling like I was bracing for impact. 2 days later, I moved into my own apartment. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an older brick building with uneven floorboards and a kitchen window that whistled when the wind picked up. But it was mine. No shared space, no borrowed time, no one standing in the doorway filming my life for an audience. The first month's rent came straight from my welding paycheck. I set my books on the shelves I'd bought secondhand, hung my jackets in a closet that didn't smell like anyone else's perfume, and placed my grandfather's letter in the top drawer of my nightstand. The quiet felt strange at first. After years of living in a house where every silence was loaded, where silence meant punishment, or the prelude to some blow-up, it took time to understand that this kind of quiet was different. It wasn't empty. It was mine. 2 days after I unpacked my last box, an envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a check, the first installment of the back rent they owed me. Paperclipped to it was a folded note in my mother's handwriting. "We hope we can put this behind us and be a family again. Love, Mom." I stared at it for a long moment, not because it moved me, but because of how much it didn't. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what it had cost me to get here. Just the assumption that I'd be willing to pretend none of it had happened. I slipped the check into my desk drawer and set the note aside. I didn't call. I didn't write back. And maybe you've been there too when someone offers you the smallest gesture and calls it peace expecting you to be grateful. Tell me in the comments, do you take it or do you hold your line? I'm genuinely curious because I know how tempting it can be to settle just to make the noise stop. That night, while organizing the last of my things, I found my old external hard drive. I hadn't plugged it in for years. Inside, buried in a folder labeled Grandpa Wave, was a video file. I clicked play. "Hey, kiddo," my grandfather's voice filled the room. "If you're hearing this, I guess I'm not around anymore. But I want you to remember something: you're going to be okay, even if they never say they're sorry. Some people only value you when they can use you. And when you stop letting them, they call it betrayal. Let them. You just keep being you." The screen went dark, but his voice stayed in my head. I backed up the file, closed the laptop, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the kind of calm that didn't need to be earned. It was simply there, waiting for me to notice it. You'd think that would be the end of it. Right, paper-signed payments arranged, everyone moving on. But I knew better. My family doesn't just walk away, they circle back looking for another angle. The first couple of weeks in my new place were almost peaceful. Work was steady, the apartment was slowly starting to feel like mine, and the only time my phone buzzed was when Lena texted to ask if I wanted to grab dinner. Then one rainy Tuesday night, I saw an unfamiliar car idling across the street from my building. Dark sedan headlights off the faint orange glow of a cigarette ember moving in the driver's seat. It was there when I got home from work. Still there 2 hours later when I peeked out through the blinds. I told myself it could be nothing, but the truth, my gut knew it wasn't random. The next morning, Mr. Lang called. His voice was calm, but there was a tension under it. "They've contacted me," he said. "Your father wants to revisit certain terms of the agreement. He claims the payment schedule is burdensome." I laughed, short, humorless. He signed it. I reminded him, Mr. Lang said, "But you should be prepared. They might try something else, something outside the paperwork." That night I triple-checked the locks, and I kept thinking about the car across the street. 2 days later, I got my answer. I was walking up the stairs to my apartment when I noticed a folded piece of paper wedged into the corner of my doorframe. No envelope, no address, just my name in Hannah's handwriting. Inside a single sentence, "We can still fix this if you just talk to us." I stood there in the hallway, the sound of rain hammering against the window, and realized they weren't done, not by a long shot. Because here's the thing, sometimes the real fight doesn't start until after you think you've won. And I'll tell you exactly what they did next. But to understand why it mattered so much, you need to know the one card I'd been holding this whole time. The thing my grandfather left me that I hadn't told anyone about. That's where the story turns, and it's the part they never saw coming. I didn't plan to use it, not at first. The card my grandfather had left me wasn't just property or money or even the trust paperwork, it was leverage. When he was still alive, Grandpa had told me once over coffee at the cabin, "Sometimes the real gift isn't what you leave someone, it's what you leave with them." I hadn't understood at the time, but I did now. Tucked away in my filing box was a sealed manila envelope marked in his handwriting, "Only if they force your hand." Inside were copies of financial ledgers, decades of property income, maintenance expenses, tax filings, all meticulously organized. And in the margins, his notes, dates, names, and transactions that didn't line up. There were entire years where rent from the commercial workshop had disappeared on paper, only to show up again in bank statements for my father's company. Cabin rental income listed as family maintenance fund with no receipts, and more than a few cash deposits tied to accounts in my mother's name. I'd kept it sealed because I'd hoped the signed admission and payment plan would be enough. But now, the note on my door, the car across the street, my father's attempt to revisit the agreement they were making, it clear they weren't done trying to control me. I called Mr. Lang. "It's time," I said simply. By the next afternoon, he'd gone through the ledgers. His voice on the phone was sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Rachel, if this is accurate, and I believe it is, they've been misreporting income for years. This goes beyond civil. We could be looking at tax fraud." The words landed like cold steel in my chest. Not fear, just the awareness that the ground had shifted again. "What do we do?" I asked. We document everything and we let them know without bluffing that we're prepared to involve the state revenue department if they try to breach the agreement. That night, as rain slicked the streets outside my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table, the ledgers spread out in front of me. I could still hear Grandpa's voice in my head. Only if they force your hand. They had. 2 days later, the dark sedan was gone from the street. Instead, I got a single email from their attorney. My clients wish to clarify that they have no intention of altering the existing agreement. Please disregard any informal outreach you may have received. It was the legal version of a white flag. But I didn't reply. I didn't need to. And if you've ever been in a fight where you had to decide whether to show your full hand or keep something in reserve, tell me how you knew it was the right time. I know for me, this was the moment I stopped wondering if I was overreacting and started realizing I'd been underreacting all along. I thought that might be the end. But I was wrong again. What happened next didn't just test my boundaries. It tested my ability to stand in the middle of a storm without moving an inch. The confrontation came on a Saturday evening, just as the sky was bruising into twilight. I'd been at the welding shop all day, my clothes still carrying the smell of hot metal, when the knock rattled my door. Not a polite knock, 3 heavy thuds, spaced just far enough apart to make the air between them feel tense. I checked the peephole, my father, alone. Part of me expected the rest of them to be lurking out of view, but the hallway was empty. He stood with his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his work jacket, shoulders squared in that way that always made him look more like a foreman than a dad. I cracked the door, the chain still latched. "What do you want?" "We need to talk," he said. His voice was low, not the bark I'd heard on the lawn weeks earlier. Face to face. "I told you. Not about the payments." He shifted his weight, glanced down the hallway. "About what you've been digging up." So that was it. They knew. I didn't answer, letting the silence draw out. His jaw tightened. "You think threatening us with that paperwork makes you better than us? You think your grandfather didn't play his own games?" "This isn't about games," I said. "It's about facts." He stepped closer, the chain pulling taut between us. "You could ruin us, Rachel. Everything we've built." I almost laughed. "You mean everything you've been skimming?" That broke the thin veneer he'd been holding. "You don't understand how business works. Families handle things internally. You take care of your own." I looked him straight in the eye. "You stopped being my own the day you threw my life into garbage bags for the neighbors to see." For a second, I thought he might actually back down. His mouth opened, then closed again. His eyes flicked to the chain between us, then back to my face. Finally, he said, "If you go to the state with this, we'll never forgive you." I held his stare. "You already stopped forgiving me. This isn't about forgiveness anymore." Something shifted in his expression. Just for a heartbeat, I saw uncertainty. Then it was gone, replaced by the same rigid mask. Without another word, he turned and walked down the hall, his footsteps echoing against the cinder block walls. I closed the door, slid the chain free, and locked both deadbolts. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel angry. I felt done. And maybe you've had that moment too, when you realize the person across from you isn't an opponent you need to outwit, but a wall you need to stop leaning on. Tell me if you've been there, because that shift changes everything. I sent Mr. Lang a brief message. They know about the ledgers. Expect movement soon. His reply came almost instantly. "Let them move. We hold our ground." I didn't know it yet, but that knock on my door was the last real attempt they'd make to intimidate me in person. The next move they made would be on paper, and it would be the one that told me exactly how far they were willing to go to get me to fold. It was a week after my father's unannounced visit when the letter arrived. A thick cream-colored envelope slid under my door while I was at work. No postage, no return address, just my name written in my mother's looping cursive. I didn't open it right away. It sat on my kitchen counter while I made coffee, while I fed the cat, while I stared out the window at the slow crawl of evening traffic. Part of me already knew it wouldn't be a heartfelt apology. My family doesn't do apologies, they do bargaining repackaged as olive branches. When I finally tore it open, the contents confirmed it, a typed proposal signed by all 3 of them, offering to adjust our agreement. In exchange for my returning the ledgers and promising not to involve outside authorities, they would pay me a lump sum less than half of what was still owed and relinquish any claim to the lake cabin. It was their old trick in a new wrapper: give me something sentimental and hope I'd trade it for something substantial. I slid the papers back into the envelope and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk under a stack of utility bills. Out of sight, but not forgotten. That night I called Mr. Lang. They want the ledgers, I said. Of course they do, he replied. The ledgers don't just prove mismanagement, they prove intent? That's the difference between a messy family dispute and a criminal case. So we say no, I asked, even though I already knew the answer. We say nothing, he corrected. We let them wonder which move we'll make next. I hung up feeling a strange mix of calm and anticipation. Like standing on a shoreline watching a storm you know is going to break you, just don't know exactly when. And here's where I'll pause, because what happened next was the twist I never saw coming. I thought the fight would stay between lawyers and letters behind closed doors where rules applied. I was wrong. The next time they came for me, it wasn't on paper. It was in a place I thought was safe somewhere. I never imagined they'd show up, let alone try to corner me. And when they did, I realized they hadn't learned a thing. It happened on a Thursday night at the community center, where I'd started taking a welding certification upgrade course. The building was small, tucked between a laundromat and a used furniture store, the kind of place where no one paid much attention to who came and went. Class had just wrapped up. I was packing away my helmet and gloves when I caught sight of movement in the hallway mirror, 3 figures standing near the entrance. My mother, my brother, Mark, and Hannah. For a second I thought I was imagining it. But then Hannah raised her phone, already recording her face lit with the glow of the screen. Rachel. My mother called, her voice pitched high enough for it to carry over the hum of the soda machine. We've been waiting for you. Every head in the room turned toward me. My instructor glanced up from locking the tool cabinet, his brows knitting. You know them. I forced a steady breath. Unfortunately, yes. I stepped into the hallway, my boots echoing on the tile. This is not the place, I said quietly. Mark smirked, leaning against the wall. Every place is the place when you're dodging the truth. I felt the room behind me go still. Hannah shifted her phone to catch both of us in frame. We're here to settle this face to face, she said, as if she were narrating a live stream. I didn't give them the scene they wanted. You've been told through your attorney and mine that all communication goes through legal channels. You're trespassing. My mother stepped forward, tissue in hand, eyes glistening. You've turned this into a circus, Rachel. We're just trying to find common ground. Common ground. I took a step closer, so my voice didn't have to rise. You emptied my things onto a lawn for the neighborhood to watch. You stole from me. And now you're standing in my classroom with a camera. That's not common ground. That's harassment. Mark's smirk faltered. Hannah lowered the phone an inch, but didn't stop recording. I'm asking you once to leave, I said. If you don't, I'll call security and the police. And this time I'll make sure the charges stick. For a moment, no one moved. Then my instructor appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. Everything all right here? They were just leaving, I said, my eyes never leaving my mother's. She opened her mouth like she might argue, but Mark touched her elbow, steering her toward the door. Hannah followed, phone still pointed backward, until the glass swung shut behind them. I stood in the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, my pulse still steady. There was no shaking, no second-guessing, just the quiet certainty that whatever they'd tried to pull tonight had failed. And maybe you've had that moment when someone expects you to crumble in public, but instead you hold your ground so firmly they have no choice but to retreat. It's not loud, it's not flashy, but it's the kind of win you feel in your bones. That night I sent a short email to Mr. Lang. They showed up at my class, filming. I told them to leave. His reply was as precise as ever documented. They're running out of moves. I didn't know it then, but the endgame was already in motion. The next letter from their attorney wouldn't be another cheap offer. It would be their concession, the one that finally closed the book. The letter arrived on a Monday morning, slid under my apartment door in a plain white envelope with the law firm's return address stamped in the corner. I recognized it instantly. This was the stationery of their attorney, not mine. I made coffee before I opened it, not because I needed the caffeine, but because I wanted to savor the moment. The sound of the kettle, the smell of the beans. It was the opposite of every tense letter opening I'd done over the past months. This time, I already knew what I was going to find. Inside was a formal document titled Final Settlement Agreement, Amendment. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was simple. They were conceding to every single term I had demanded. The payment schedule for the full $50,000 in back rent would remain in place, non-negotiable. The third-party property manager had already been contracted, their contact information listed in the appendix. Most satisfying of all, the signed admission of failure to disclose and accurately distribute property income was now not just a single page. It had been expanded into a notarized affidavit, witnessed and filed. 4 signatures sat at the bottom in blue ink. My father's bold and jagged, my mother's looping, Hannah's tidy but small, and Mark's impatient scrawl. I read every line twice, then set the document on the table and just looked at it. Not like a trophy, but like a lock that had finally clicked shut. This was the end of the fight. Not the end of the story, because some scars don't fade, but the end of their hold over me. I signed my part in my own unhurried handwriting, letting the pen glide over the paper as though every loop and curve was reclaiming something they'd tried to take. And here's the thing, winning doesn't always feel like fireworks. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's the absence of their noise in your life. 2 days later, the first payment hit my account. No memo line, no acknowledgement, just the transfer. I moved it into savings without hesitation. That evening, I went for a walk around the block. The air was cool, the street lamps humming faintly. For the first time in months, I wasn't scanning for parked cars I didn't recognize or rehearsing what I'd say if they showed up unannounced. I passed the corner store, the same one I'd avoided since the eviction circus, and stepped inside. The cashier recognized me but didn't say anything, just rang up my grape soda like nothing had happened. And maybe that's what victory really looks like, not some grand announcement, but the return of ordinary moments that are entirely your own. When I got home, I sent Mr. Lang one final email. It's done. Thank you for helping me get my life back. His reply came within minutes. It was yours all along. You just needed them to let go. I thought the final payment hitting my account would feel like the closing of a door. But when the envelope came hand-delivered this time, it still carried the faint scent of my mother's perfume. Inside, along with the cashier's check for the next installment, was a folded note in her handwriting. We hope we can put this behind us and be a family again. Love, Mom. I sat at my kitchen table, the note under my fingertips, the check resting on top of it like a paperweight. The words didn't sting. They didn't warm me either. They were just hollow. No mention of the eviction, no acknowledgement of the lies, no apology. Just a vague hope I'd pretend the months of public humiliation and legal battles had been nothing more than a misunderstanding. I placed the note back in the envelope and slid the check into my desk drawer. The money mattered, the sentiment did not. That night, as I sipped coffee on my balcony, I realized something. This wasn't about getting them to see me differently. It was about me seeing myself differently. I'd spent years thinking I had to earn my place in a family that had already decided I didn't belong. Now I understood that belonging isn't given, it's claimed. I pulled out my phone and opened the draft of a video I'd been working on quietly for weeks. Not a tell-all rant, not an exposé, just a piece about boundaries, about what happens when you stop explaining yourself to people who benefit from misunderstanding you. The first clip was a still shot of the signed agreement. The next, a close-up of my grandfather's letter. Over it, my voice. Some people will call it betrayal when you stop letting them take from you, but the truth, that's the moment you start belonging to yourself. I wasn't planning to tag them, but I knew they'd see it eventually. That wasn't the point. The point was to reach the people who were still in the middle of their own battles, who needed to hear that they weren't crazy for holding the line. And listen, if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect, I want you to watch the next video I've linked here. It's a story about someone who thought they'd lost everything until they realized they'd finally been set free. If my story resonated with you, that one might just give you the last push you need. I hit upload, set the phone down, and stepped back inside. The video wasn't revenge, it was closure on my terms. What came next wasn't about them anymore. It was about me and the life I was finally building without their shadow looming over it. The apartment is quiet now. Not the tense, waiting for the other shoe kind of quiet I grew up with, but a calm that seeps into everything, my mornings, my work, even the way I breathe. Some nights I leave the kitchen window cracked just to hear the wind whistle through it. It reminds me that imperfections don't make a place unworthy of being called home. The check from my family sits in a folder in my desk untouched except for when I log the payment. There's no ceremony to it anymore, just a line item in my budget as mundane as the electric bill. The note that came with the first one is gone. I don't need it. On the shelf by my bed, my grandfather's letter rests inside a frame. Not because I want to display the legal victory, but because it's a reminder that someone once saw my worth without asking me to prove it. Lena still checks in, usually with a text like dinner or you'll never guess what happened at work. We meet at the same little diner, split fries, and talk about anything but court dates and family drama. I've stopped looking over my shoulder when I walk home. The dark sedan never came back. The knocks have stopped. And the only people who call are the ones I actually want to hear from. I don't think reconciliation is impossible. It's just not something I'm chasing. Some distances are healthy, some silences are necessary. Grandpa was right. You're going to be okay even if they never say they're sorry. And now, in this little apartment with its whistling window and mismatched furniture, I'm not just okay, I'm free.